Everybody, welcome to the Midday Magazine show. I'm your host, Burhan. I hope you're all well out there. You are joining us live on 87.9 FM, ramadanradio.org, and we are live streaming on YouTube and Facebook as well. Today, we're going to be talking about healthy eating, healthy diets. We're talking about how our diet affects our overall health and wellness. And hopefully, if you grab a pen and a piece of paper, later on in the show, we're going to be going through a couple of delicious recipes for everybody to try out. And you can maybe experiment even today and have them for your iftar or for tomorrow morning for your suhoor. And joining me later on will be Sister Zainab, who's an amateur chef. We'll be going through those recipes. And joining me right now is Sister Shanaz. Assalamu alaikum, Shanaz.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. Shanaz is a clinical dietitian, and she runs her own remote nutrition consultancy called Gutsy Nutrition, which provides telephone and video consultations. So the subject today, Shanaz, is your area of expertise. So let's kick off with an easy one for you, which is how does healthy eating fit in with the rest of our lives? We especially during Ramadan, eating tends to be central to it, although perhaps it shouldn't be. And we tend to kind of gorge ourselves a little bit at the appropriate times. But within Ramadan and outside of Ramadan as well, we need to make sure that we have a good balance of health, fitness, etc. Just how critical is that in terms of our younger population and our older population? At what point as well does that switch happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're right. Healthy eating is really about a balance, both within Ramadan and also out with. And in its general context, healthy eating is about having kind of a balance of different foods and nutrients to help your overall health, to have good health and well-being. It's not about dieting, which a lot of people associate healthy eating with. And it doesn't have to be boring or difficult. It doesn't mean that you need to cut out all your favorite foods. So healthy eating in its general sense is about enjoying your favorite foods, but at the same time being mindful of the main food groups there are out there and what it is that you're eating. So when we talk about different stages in life, yes, your nutritional requirements are going to be different when you're younger compared to when you're older. You might not need as much calories and protein and things, but in the general sense with nutrients, it tends to be the same.
Okay.
So your kind of key food groups that we're talking about are, for example, carbohydrates, first of all, and they really provide your main source of energy, your fuel source. And that's really the starch, which is broken down to produce glucose, which is then used as your body as a source of energy throughout the day. And then you've got your fruits and vegetables. So they provide vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and fiber, which is essential for kind of gut health. And some people might be experiencing changes in their gut health within Ramadan, which we can talk about a bit later in more depth. And then you've got your high protein foods, so your meats, your pulses, your meat alternatives as well. They tend to play a really big part nowadays because we've got so many options. And then your dairy foods, so they provide your sources of calcium and your protein. And all of these things combined are really to prevent long-term diseases, but also if you have long-term diseases like diabetes or heart disease and things, it's really thinking about the balance of different foods to help the management of those conditions and also to prevent further complications of these things. So although we might have to tailor these things according to what we're going through in life or how much our activity levels are, the general principles tend to stay the same throughout the whole of life.
Okay, great. That's a fantastic introduction. That gives us a really good overall summary of the situation. And if you want to join us, if you want to call in, join us on the show live, or text us or WhatsApp us your questions to Shanaz about about your well, yes, about your diet, but not necessarily about dieting, about healthy eating, then do join us. The number is 077 614 60614, 077 614 60614, and let us have your questions. So just to delve into that a little bit more, you mentioned that the different food groups, the carbs, the protein, etc. Our cultural foods tend to be very carb heavy, right? So, I mean, I can't really see myself having a meal unless I've got either rice or bread on the side. Is that okay?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm a big advocate for us being able to still have our cultural foods, and I think quite a lot of the time with the resources that we have, but both within the NHS and out with, they're not really tailored to different cultural foods. So sometimes it can feel when we see these different resources that our cultural foods are perhaps not healthy, but in actual fact, just by changing the balance of foods, so having your rice or your different breads or your roti and things like that, but having a good portion of fruits and vegetables alongside that. So pairing it with, for example, a vegetable curry, or if it's a
Right.
meat curry, adding some vegetables into that, or having a salad alongside it, is absolutely fine. So you definitely don't need to completely change to a Western diet in order to do healthy eating. It's absolutely achievable with cultural foods, and it's just having the knowledge to be able to do that. And perhaps working with a healthcare professional who has an interest in delving into these different types of foods that we tend to have more, rather than completely adopting a different diet, because then it's not achievable.
Yes. Yeah.
And we want to sustain that kind of long-term change and long-term health benefits from our diet.
So if we have, we hear a lot about having kind of 5 a day with the fruit and veg. And I know that's a general guideline. I'm sure you can give us a little bit more information about that. But if we have, like you said, a vegetable curry, or not to just restrict it to kind of South Asian dishes, whether it's kind of West Indian dishes or whatever it might be, Malaysian dishes, having veggies as part of your main course, does that count as one of your 5 a day?
Yeah, absolutely. So vegetables and also things like beans and pulses, they actually count as your 5 a day as well. So
Okay.
across all of these cultures that you have mentioned, there will be some source of kind of either a curry or a stew or something of that sort that will feature as a main meal. And yes, it absolutely counts. So it doesn't have to be that those fruits and vegetables are only snacks and then they count. It could be incorporated into meals, and that is actually a better way to reach your 5 a day if we incorporate it into our meals, because these foods are higher in fiber and they could help you to feel fuller for longer as well.
Okay. And you mentioned that the carbs, etc., is your fuel and you burn energy. Now, you'll only burn energy if you move. So again, we have these guidelines around 10,000 steps a day, etc. Well, I'm not quite sure where they come from, but I suppose it's a reasonable target to try and achieve. During lockdown, etc., a lot of people didn't manage to achieve that, and they did end up staying at home a lot. I know there were these YouTube videos for doing fitness, etc. But if somebody doesn't move as much, does that mean that they should eat less? And if they do move a lot, does that give them the license to eat more?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because for people that don't have very much activity, they might feel like they really need to restrict their diets, but actually, even just being awake, for your body to be able to do all of the different things that it needs to do, it still has an energy requirement. So you still need to be eating kind of a healthy, balanced diet, even if you're not doing much activity. But you're right, if you are doing kind of more activity, then it's important for you to perhaps increase certain portions of the different food groups. So perhaps having more of the carbohydrate fuel sources, depending on what types of activity you're doing, whether it's kind of resistant training or if you're running, different things like that. But yeah, it does depend on how much activity you're doing. The 10,000 steps seems to be a really popular kind of goal for people at the moment. However, the government guidelines are for some sort of movement 30 minutes, at least 5 times a week. So
30 minutes 5 times a week. Okay.
yeah, so even if that is in Ramadan, I appreciate it can be quite difficult. So even if that is some form of gentle exercise like yoga or going for a short walk, some people find it easier to do that just before iftar, because they know that they're then going to be able to drink and eat and things like that. So it's easier to do it at that time, but it's different for everyone.
Okay, we have a question through from one of our listeners. I don't understand the question, so I'll just read it out and you can answer it. Do we need carbs if we are fat adapted? I don't know what that phrase means, but maybe you do and can elaborate.
Fat adapted, sorry, can I just clarify?
Fat adapted.
Okay, I'm not really sure what that means either, but
okay, well, maybe the caller could text back in and explain the question, which we don't really understand.
But in a general sense, everybody does need a source of carbohydrates in their diet, because that is the main source of energy. And if we don't provide our body with carbohydrates, it actually uses your protein and your other foods to then be able to metabolize glucose from another way. And in a sense, it's making your body a little bit more stressed to be able to make these fuel sources. So it still needs glucose. It'll just find it from another source.
Right. Okay. Excellent. And if you want to send in your questions, then please do. The number is 077 614 60614. You're listening to the Midday Magazine. We are live on Facebook and YouTube and ramadanradio.org, talking about healthy eating. So we've talked about eating, but the other thing, of course, during Ramadan and outside Ramadan is being hydrated. We tend to get very dehydrated. So could you talk a little bit about the importance of that, the kind of the hydration side of things, as well as how it fits in with the overall healthy eating and healthy dieting?
Yeah, sure. So hydration, I'll just start off in the general sense, is really important for your metabolism. It's important for you to not feel as fatigued, and just for your general well-being. And in Ramadan, it can be quite difficult for people to be able to meet their hydration needs if they're perhaps not drinking enough, or if they're not choosing hydrating foods, or if they're eating too much salt. So these are the main things that can limit hydration in Ramadan. So we would always recommend to drink little and often in between iftar and suhoor, and not over kind of burden your body with too much fluid at once, because then you can feel bloated and not so good and not be able to do the other things that you need to do, like prayers in between those times. So always choose little and often kind of fluids.
But how do we balance that when you've got, especially during Ramadan, for instance, in these times, we're not opening our fast till 8:30, or where you were saying that up where you are, it's almost 9 o'clock now, and then we've only really got about 6 hours or so.
Yeah. So what I usually tell people is to aim for around a glass of fluid for every hour that they're awake. However, your hydration is not only from the amount of water that you're drinking, it actually comes from your foods as well. So if you're to choose hydrating foods like melons at iftar, so perhaps opening your fast with your dates, and then opting for a fruit salad which contains lots of hydrating fruits, and then having a soup, that would count as your hydration as well. So it doesn't just come from your fluids in terms of glasses of water or other drinks that you're having. It can also come from your foods as well.
And does tea and coffee count? I'm sure people are wondering about that, because a lot of people will open their fast with dates and a coffee.
Yeah. So in the wider context outside Ramadan, tea and coffee does count. However, because we've got such a short window in Ramadan to be able to eat and drink, caffeine can be a diuretic, and that means it can make you go to the bathroom a lot quicker to then excrete that compared to a glass of water would. So what I would usually recommend is people cut down their caffeine intake or completely cut it out in Ramadan if they can. And that usually comes by preparation prior to Ramadan. So if people have gone from having 5 cups of coffee a day before Ramadan to then having absolutely nothing during, it can be quite difficult. So that is kind of a lot of preparation before. But I would generally say to people to cut it out during Ramadan if they can, just to help hydration levels.
Okay, thank you. We're going to be joined in a second by Sister Zainab. Just to let you know that we are on ramadanradio.org and we are live streaming on Facebook and YouTube. And if you have any questions for our resident dietitian, Shehnaz, then do join us on 077 614 60614. So we're going to go through a recipe now, and I'll allow our guest to explain what the recipe is for and go through the quantities and the process, etc. Can you hear me, Sister Zainab?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank God.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Okay, Assalamu alaikum, Zainab. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
So, do tell us, what are you going to be cooking for us, or telling us how to cook, rather? I think it's going to be difficult to ask you to do the cooking live, but you're going to be explaining a recipe for us today.
Yes, I will be explaining a recipe that is, it's a quite healthy recipe. It fits into many eating lifestyles. The first recipe we're going to go through is courgette boats.
Okay.
This recipe is very, both my recipes today are very fast and easy to prepare. Anyone that has no cooking skills can do it easily, and it's quite healthy. First of all, we will need 2 large courgettes, okay, and it is very versatile. I'm gonna today cut them lengthwise, okay, and scoop them out with a spoon, and then we'll fill them in. So the first thing we're going to do is prepare our courgettes. We're going to cut them and scoop out the seeds with a spoon. Do not throw the seeds away because we're going to use them in the filling, okay? And then the next step is we're going to put the courgettes in a oven-safe dish and sprinkle them with salt and pepper. We prepare the filling on stovetop. I'm using today minced beef. You can use any kind of filling. You can replace it with any vegetable. We can replace it with mushrooms, but usually beef tastes really good in this recipe. You can also mix beef with mushrooms. Okay, can you hear me? Hello? Janet, can you hear me type?
Yes, we can hear you. Just carry on.
Okay. I think we lost Burhan. But
yeah, do you want to just carry on?
Okay. So we will now prepare I'll tell you how to prepare the filling. In a pan, you can add a tablespoon of olive oil and a diced onion. You'll stir it until it's transparent. And then after that, you'll add in the beef and keep on stirring it until it cooks. It will lose a little bit of the water. You want it to be dry, so it doesn't make the courgettes soggy when you use it in the. So you'll keep on stirring until it dries out. All its water evaporates. You can now add in the tomato paste and the seeds that we removed from the courgette when we were scooping it out, and also stir until it dries up a little bit more. We will add salt and pepper and garlic powder and any spices that you like. Anything that will make your dish feel like home and you like it better. Okay, and then now we will stuff the courgettes with the beef. This is how it will look after it is cooked. Okay, we will place.
Looks
We
delicious.
already prepared. Okay, thank you. We will prepare them in, as I said, in an oven-safe dish, and then we will put it in the preheated oven. It is usually on medium heat for like 15 minutes. It is optional after these 15 minutes to add on top some shredded Parmesan cheese. You can also add cottage cheese, or you can totally skip the step, whatever you like. It's just a sprinkle on top, and put it in for like until the cheese melts and incorporates with the courgettes, and then serve it. And bon appetit. You can serve it with steamed rice, without anything. If you don't eat rice, whatever you like. It's a very versatile dish.
And would you, thank you very much for that. That was fantastic. Would you recommend that more for an iftar dish or for a suhoor dish? Is it something which it would satiate your hunger, or is it something which would help us through the day?
Because it has fibers and proteins, I think it is something that would satiate the hunger. So it does suit to be a good dish for iftar. But for me personally, I eat all foods at any time, and I don't have this restriction: breakfast food and lunch and dinner food. So whatever you'd like. But this is generally a very good iftar dish because it has both the vegetables and the proteins. So it will be very satiating.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And we'll come back to you for a second recipe. Do stay with us. Apologies, I think you lost me for a while there. I actually didn't hear much of the recipe at all, unfortunately. That's my bad luck, but I can catch it myself on YouTube and Facebook afterwards. Please do write to Virgin Media to complain that my Wi-Fi. Right, so Sister Shanaz, what do you think of the recipe, and how do you think a recipe like that fits nicely into what we talked about before?
Yeah, it looks really good. Thank you for that, Sister Zainab. I think a recipe like that is a really good source of obviously vegetables and protein, and perhaps pairing it with a source of carbohydrate would be really good in terms of getting enough energy for the next fast. If you're going to have it for iftar or suhoor, depending on what kind of things you like for suhoor. So yeah, it was really good. Thank you.
Okay, so just go back to a couple of questions that we've had. One is, what are the best foods to feel less hungry during Ramadan? So what are the ones which will help us to last during the day? We talked about the different food groups. Is there a particular food group or a particular type of food which will help us to kind of have more energy for a longer period of time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you want to aim for foods which are broken down slowly, so that your blood sugar levels are kind of stable throughout the day. And these foods are your high fiber starchy foods, so things that contain oats, bran, whole wheat, and perhaps pairing that with a source of protein, so things like yogurt, beans, fish, or meat. And always having suhoor is really important to not feel hungry during your fast. So if you struggle to perhaps wake up for suhoor or make something at that time, I would suggest having something with these types of foods in it, but maybe preparing it before. So things like overnight oats or baked oats or something like that is a really good way for something just to be ready for you to then wake up and eat it, and not having to think about what to do at that time, or something that is really lengthy in terms of preparation. So a lot of it is preparation, but also choosing the right things. So yeah, your high fiber starchy foods with protein are the best things.
And I suppose the same question for your thirst as well, for keeping your thirst away. Now, obviously, water is probably the primary go-to liquid for suhoor to keep your thirst away. But is there something which is kind of better than water, like a drink with these energy drinks, or tea, coffee we mentioned before, fizzy drinks, orange juice, which will give you the fruit and the etc. as well? Or would you say just stick to water?
Yeah, there is some evidence to say that sports drinks can help to hydrate you a bit better. However, we're not really there with enough evidence for that yet. So I would always just say to people to drink water, reduce caffeine. If they are going to have fruit drinks, then limiting it to a small 150 ml glass a day, because they are very high sugar. And in terms of hydration and thirst, like we spoke about earlier, watching salt intake is a really big one for lots of different cultures. So when it comes to salt intake, we're talking about being mindful of what stocks, seasonings, and spice mixes are used within cooking, because quite often people will say that they don't add any salt to their food, but they're using all of these different things which actually have a lot of salt in them, and they can make you feel more thirsty and cause imbalances in your hydration. And then also being mindful that we're talking about all different types of salt. So some people will say to me that, well, I have pink salt and that's okay because that's a lot healthier than normal salt. But
I say that to myself.
Yeah, but in actual fact, in order to get the nutrients that are in pink salt, you would need to have a lot of that salt, and it actually causes more disruption in your hydration. So you're better off opting for your key nutrients in fruits and vegetables and limiting salt intake. And then in terms of hydration, we also want to think about the amount of salt in other foods. So things like pickles, cheeses, all these different snacks that we eat. So we're not necessarily adding salt to them. However, they have a lot of salt in them. So it's just being mindful of all these different things that we're eating.
It's a very good area to discuss, to be honest. I think sometimes, for instance, you can convince yourself that something is healthy because it has something healthy in it, but it's prepared in an unhealthy way. So, fish and chips, for instance, right? You're getting the fish part, but you're getting the deep fried batter as well. And I suppose once every now and again, there's nothing wrong with it, and you are getting the fish. That's not to say you're not. But are we cheating ourselves when we do things like that?
Yeah, I would say to enjoy everything in moderation. So, like you say, it's something that you probably wouldn't have that often, and that's okay. However, if these foods become things that we're then having regularly, we would need to rethink that and think about the balance of nutrients in that meal. So like you said, you would be getting the fish part of that. However, you would also be getting quite a lot of fat within that meal. So it's really trying to balance things. So perhaps maybe keeping that to a once a month thing or however often you want. But then thinking about things like fish. So the recommendations are to have two portions of fish per week. So the majority of your fish to be oven baked or just a healthier source and less fat. But we're not advocating for everybody to cut out all of these foods that they enjoy. It's just having things in moderation.
Well, that's a fantastic segue back to Sister Zainab, who's going to be preparing a second dish for us, which I believe is fish-based. So, Sister Zainab, are you back with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I think I'm right, and that you're going to be doing a fish-based second dish. Please, please go ahead.
Okay, we're going to make tuna cakes. This dish can be a very good side dish for iftar, and it could be a great dish for suhoor. It's also very easy to make and quite fast, and it's very tasty. It looks in the end very sophisticated, but it actually is a very simple dish to make. So first of all, the ingredients are a can of tuna, mustard, salt and pepper, some garlic powder, 2 eggs. You can also add in spring onions or vegetables. You can also add in some grated cheese if you want it to hold itself a little bit better. If you eat carbs, you can add in some corn flour, and then you will mix all these ingredients together in a bowl, and then you will make them into small patties. This is how it will look in the end. So this is the size of the patties that we're gonna make. Okay.
Very good.
Okay. And after you do them into this size, now you have 2 options to cook them. You can cook them on the stovetop in a skillet with a tablespoon of olive oil, 5 minutes on each side until it cooks well. It's good. It's important to be done on medium heat so that all the eggs cook well all the way to the inside. I do them in the air fryer, but you'll need to brush the air fryer with some oil so that they don't stick at the bottom, and flip them in the middle. Also, it will take 5 minutes on each side. And then you serve it. You can serve it with some yogurt dip, or just as it is, like that. You can also serve it if you eat carbs with you can serve it with bread, and it tastes great.
Well, if it tastes as good as it looks, then I think we'll all be very happy. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Please do stay with us and join in with the discussion. We have about 15 minutes left. We still have quite a lot to cover, so it'd be good to get both the perspective of the dietitian and the chef as well. So my next question to both of you, because we've done a dish which was veggie with beef, which is the courgette boats and the tuna cakes, and a lot of people may not be eating meat or not be eating fish. So I know vegan diets and vegetarian diets are increasingly popular nowadays. I'll go back to Shahnaz first. Can you still have a fully you can have all your nutrients through a vegan diet? Is that something which is, I know a lot of, especially among the Muslim community, it seems to be an anathema, but what's your version of events on that?
Yeah, I think in a vegan diet, it's really important to choose the right food and be well educated in terms of what the key nutrients are that you perhaps may not get from a vegan diet that you would normally get from meat sources. So, for example, iodine, which is usually found in milk, vitamin B12, which you would usually get from things like eggs or different meats and things. So it's just being mindful of what you are kind of missing out on in terms of not having animal sources, and then trying to opt for your vegan products that do contain them. So a lot of vegan products are now fortified with these key vitamins and minerals, which you would usually get from kind of an animal-based diet. So it's opting for those. So to give you an example, when it comes to plant-based milks, it's better to opt for the non-organic varieties, because the non-organic varieties are actually fortified with calcium and iodine and other key nutrients. However, your organic ones are not. So it's just being mindful of where you're going to get your nutrients from. But you can absolutely get all of the nutrients if you're doing it the right way.
Okay, thank you very much. And Zainab, do you find, as a chef, are you getting increasing requests for vegetarian dishes, vegan dishes? Do you see that trend happening?
I'm generally a low carb chef, so it's usually not so in my area to cook things with a lot of vegetables, or mainly vegetables. It's because I do a low carb diet, and I am a low carb recipe creator, so it's usually very hard to make a full balanced diet with low carbs and only vegetables. Plus, I believe in the importance of eating from the full spectrum. So it doesn't. No, I do not do vegetarian and vegan.
Okay, but then I suppose that the follow-up question to that is if you're doing more of a higher protein sort of diet and recipes, there must be healthier ways of preparing them than, for instance, if somebody's just having them as part of a range of foods, right? So could you help us with a bit of that in terms of some of your recipes? How do you make sure that they are low carb, but also they are not high fat?
One of the things is the way you cook them and the cuts you choose. So one of the things you don't have to incorporate red meat unless it's a lot of advice is like 2 days a week. You can go a little bit more than that, but generally speaking, you can use leaner cuts. Today I used my minced beef, for example. I bought the 12% fat. You can go for less if you like. I usually don't go for high fat minced beef. Having chicken within your diet is one of the things that to keep you in a lower fat version. We don't deep fry. I prefer frying in the air fryer or cooking in some olive oil or some very very shallow amount of fat. This is the main ways of making it not so high fat while you're cooking a high protein diet.
Okay, thank you very much. You're listening to the Midday Magazine. We're talking about healthy eating. You can send in your questions and your comments for our guests, who is Zainab, who's a chef, and Shahnaz, who's a clinical dietitian. The number is 077 614 60614. We've got about 15 minutes left. We do have another show coming up later today at around 7 o'clock, I believe, which they're going to be talking about kind of mental health, and also touching upon something related to what we are talking about today, which is eating disorders. So I don't want to step on their toes or anything, but can we just talk a little bit about it, just for a couple of minutes, with Shahnaz? We talked about having a balanced diet, etc., and not obsessing about quantities and numbers of steps and glasses of water and how many fruits and veg a day. That can become a little bit obsessive, can't it? And that can lead to eating disorders. Can you just touch around that, and then hopefully people can tune in at 7 o'clock for a more detailed discussion as well?
Yeah, I think it can be really easy to become obsessive on numbers and calorie counting and things like that. But if you're somebody who already struggles with that on a day-to-day basis, sometimes Ramadan can be a trigger for these things as well, and perhaps it could kind of feed into the behaviors of eating disorders. So it can be a very difficult time, actually, Ramadan, for people with eating disorders. And I think it's great that you have a show that is going to touch on that, because it's not something that is spoken about very much or highlighted. So it's really important to discuss that.
Okay, good stuff. So do join us for that as well. That's 7 o'clock. That is, we have it's called Mental Health and Eating Disorders at 7 p.m. tonight on Ramadan Radio. Going back to Sister Zainab, a lot of people may think that healthy eating has to be quite expensive, because you have to source from specialist food stores, specialist butchers, etc. Do you find that to be the case when you're preparing your healthy meals?
Actually, as you saw today, this is a quite healthy, two healthy recipes. All I used was 2 courgettes and 100 grams of minced beef. And in the other recipe, I used a can of tuna and 2 eggs. And I made 2 quite fancy dishes, and they look good, they taste good. You spice them up, which isn't really expensive, and add them next to whatever side dish you'd like. It's usually a pressure you feel whenever you start eating in a certain way or eating healthy. When you like enter a community or a group of people that talk about this way of eating or discuss healthy eating, you'd find them all. You'd find a lot of talking about organic food. In the case of high protein, like you'd find a lot of talking about grass-fed beef or grass-fed meats, and it usually makes us feel very pressured into feeling like what we're eating is not so as superior. But actually speaking, it is usually not the case. Like in the UK, most meat is already grass-fed. So it's not like an issue. For example, you don't need to eat from a specialty meat source, for example, to get a grass-fed meat, because it's usually this is the case in the UK.
Okay.
If you go for free-range eggs, it's good, but you really don't have to. You will get a good amount of nutrients from regular eggs and from as Dr. Shahnaz said, for example, for the milks, the milk substitutes, we would think I would think I just bought my daughter a bottle of organic oat milk, thinking it's more superior and better, while actually it's obviously it isn't. So with some knowledge, it's like a mainstream way of thinking about healthy eating, while actually it is not the case. You don't have to eat expensive to eat healthy. Yeah. So.
Do you find that as well, Shahnaz? Do you get clients when they speak to you about their dietary habits, etc., and they seek your advice? Is that something which they raise as well as to whether that's going to hit them in the pocket?
Yeah, absolutely. Healthy eating is always associated with being too expensive, but what people don't realize is that even when we talk about simple things like meeting your 5 a day with fruits and vegetables, your actual fruits and vegetables don't have to be fresh. So you can choose frozen, you can choose tinned, and they all count towards your 5 a day. When it comes to proteins, it could even be tinned fish. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be fresh all the time. And you can bulk buy, you can bulk cook things and freeze. There's just so many different ways to reach kind of healthy eating without having to kind of spend too much. And I think another thing that we don't really factor in when we think about healthy eating is how much food waste we usually have on a day-to-day basis. So food waste is a big issue. However, when we then think about healthy eating, we think it's too expensive, but perhaps even doing simple things like properly doing meal plans and making a shopping list, checking your cupboards, and only buying the things that you definitely need. Not going shopping when you're hungry. All of these things could help you with your budget. So definitely do your big shops before Ramadan starts, because it's really difficult, as you know, going shopping when you have a fast. But even out with Ramadan, don't go shopping when you're hungry, because you'll pick up loads of extra things.
I think we've all done that, haven't we? And I know a lot of people are starting to move towards organic foods, organic meats, etc. I mean, organic meat is very expensive, but I know there's a moral argument for it in terms of being both halal and tayyib, right? So it's in terms of the conditions that the animals are kept in or are slaughtered in. If we leave that part of the debate to one side, because I'm not qualified to talk about that, just from a dietitian's perspective, how does organic food, organic meat, make a difference to us? Is it worth the additional cost?
Yeah, so actually within this country, like Sister Zainab said, there's already things in place for the quality of our food. So you're not actually going to get much more in terms of nutrition wise from organic. Some people like to do it because they feel like it is more superior, and that's fine if you can afford it. However, if you can't, it's absolutely okay just to choose the usual products that are out there. I would say that if you do go down the route of perhaps purchasing organic meats and things like that, as a whole, we do tend to eat too much meat anyway. So if that was bulked up with things like vegetables or beans and pulses and things, you can make that meat go much further than if you were just to have, for example, a meat dish on its own. So I guess it comes down to, like you say, people's morals and whether they want to do that aspect of it. And I would always support people with whatever they want to do. So if they want to go down that route, but they're on a budget, then I would help people to then be able to do that in a way that is affordable for them. But nutritionally, it's not superior.
Okay. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to make a couple of quick announcements, then go back to Shehnaz and to Zainab for some wrap-up comments and thoughts. So coming up next, at 1 o'clock, we have the Adhan for Dhuhr, and then after that, we have a program called Fit for Ramadan with Brother Jihad Shamis, and he's going to be talking about the Sunnah of horse riding with his guest. And then we have our final 2 shows coming up next Wednesday and Sunday on the Midday Magazine. So on Wednesday, we are going to be talking about networking and mentoring within Muslim professional communities, and how we can do that and why it's important and how we can help each other. And we're also going to be touching upon career paths, not necessarily being traditional to certain Muslim communities. Everybody doesn't have to become an accountant and a doctor. We have 2 guests today who are great examples of that, by the way, of alternate career paths which don't necessarily have to go down that traditional route. So we're going to be touching upon that on Wednesday. And then next Sunday, we're going to be talking about Islamic kind of academia, which is a subject which I don't think is necessarily discussed often enough, but there are lots of Islamic institutions out there, and we're going to be discussing what kind of people go for this learning. Do you have to be somebody who comes from a scholarly background? Can you have a professional or regular career and also be someone of knowledge? What's the difference between a mufti and an imam and a mujtahid and a sheikh and a scholar? What are these different terms and how do they break down? So that will be our final show, inshallah, next Sunday. But for today, I'm going to go back to Zainab for her final thoughts on what I really wanted to ask you about to wrap up was around healthy snacks, because Shanaz mentioned about snacking. So we all do snacking, but there must be some healthy snacks out there as well. Maybe you have some recipes. You could either post them on the Facebook or YouTube comments afterwards. But we need to enjoy our food, and snacking is part of the enjoyment of life. So what would you advise us in terms of healthy snacking?
I would advise in terms of healthy snacking, usually, as Dr. Shahnaz said, investing time in bulk cooking. You can also invest time in cooking your own snacks to make sure that they are healthy. They have healthy ingredients that you consider suitable for your way of eating. It's much easier to make a sugar-free snacks with substitutes like sweeteners or honey, whatever that is healthy for you. So I would always recommend that people cook something. For Ramadan, I usually go for chia puddings, which is it sounds very simple, but it actually tastes very good. It's hydrating. It is very versatile. So if you feel like something that tastes like vanilla, you can add some vanilla and it will be a vanilla pudding. You want to add cinnamon, it will be a cinnamon pudding, cocoa, and so on. It is an extremely versatile seed. It suits all kinds of eating. And it really does taste great, and it definitely helps you stay hydrated throughout Ramadan. So this is one of the things I usually always have on hand, and it's very good for suhoor too. As I said, your two options are, if you're really in a rush, you can do a quick chia pudding. If you have time to bake something, I can post some recipes of gluten-free, sugar-free basbousa, for example, or any kind of dessert. It's better off being prepared than having some not so healthy snack or option.
That's great. I'm glad you mentioned a few of those dishes there, because it reminds us of something that Shanaz said earlier, is that we all have our cultural dishes which we enjoy, and it is important that we enjoy them and we don't feel that we have to compromise, and it's more about the balance.
Yes, exactly. That's why I mentioned basbousa, because I come from Egypt and it's a very big part of Ramadan. So usually this is the main thing I'm asked for. Ramadan, we need Oriental sweets. Okay.
So you are mostly fixated on fool and basbousa.
Exactly, fool and basbousa. I'm not a fool person, but I'm a basbousa person.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Shanaz and Zainab. Shanaz, I didn't go to you for final thoughts as well. Just to wrap up, you talked at the beginning about a holistic approach. We also talked about at certain ages, it becomes more important. Maybe you could just touch on that at the end. At what age we should really start concentrating on making sure that our diet is healthy. I know it's important throughout all ages, but we see our younger generation, they tend to eat quite a lot and they can burn it off. But there's probably a tipping point. Maybe you could just touch upon that as we wrap up.
Yeah, I would have to say that it is throughout life, and I couldn't give you an age where there's a tipping point, but usually people are able to identify that themselves. They perhaps have maybe been eating the same foods their whole lives, but then they notice that they suddenly have loads of weight gain and things like that. So it varies for everyone. But these habits are usually instilled during younger life and then carry on throughout the whole of life. So that's the aim.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So start young, create that habit, and continue it throughout life. And hopefully, inshallah, you'll have healthy aging years. rather than anything else. Well, thank you very much to both Shahnaz and to Zainab for joining me today. It was a fascinating discussion. Thank you for providing us with your advice, with your recipes. I will ask possibly if Zainab could just post the recipes in the comments section on YouTube and Facebook, in case you didn't get a chance to write them down, you didn't have a pen and paper. Please do join us again next time on Wednesday at 12 o'clock for the Midday Magazine. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.